Ja, meine Damen und Herren, ich freue mich sehr, Sie heute Abend hier bei dem Vortrag im Kunsthistorischen Museum begrüßen zu dürfen. Es ist ein Vortrag von Professor van der Stighelen, die eine ausgewiesene Expertin für die Malerin Michaelina Wautier ist. Ich hoffe, Sie haben schon Gelegenheit gehabt, die wunderschöne Ausstellung anzuschauen, die wir unten in den Sonderausstellungsräumen am Montag, also vorvorgestern eröffnet haben. Das ist eine Ausstellung, die Gerlinde Gruber, unsere Kuratorin für flämische Barockmalerei, kuratiert hat, zusammengestellt hat. Eigentlich sollte Gerlinde an meiner Stelle hier stehen, aber sie ist leider krankheitshalber verhindert und ich glaube, ich spreche im Namen aller Kollegen, wenn ich ihr gute Besserung und alles Gute wünsche. Aber es ist wirklich Gerlindes Ausstellung und dem einzigen anderen Mitarbeiter, dem ich unbedingt noch danken muss, ist Charlotte Rosen, ihre kuratorische Assistentin, die wirklich das dann auch wunderbar zu Ende gebracht hat. Gerlinde Gruber ist es gelungen, praktisch alle bekannten Werke dieser lange zu Unrecht in Vergessenheit geratenen Künstlerin, auch alle wiederentdeckten Werke hier in dieser Ausstellung zu vereinen. Man sieht die Fülle an Themen, Thematik, die unglaubliche Vielfalt an Themen, die eigentlich ganz untypisch sind für eine Malerin. In ihren Werken kann man versammelt in der Ausstellung sehen. Es ist auch Sie werden viele oder einige Bilder sehen, die Sie normalerweise nicht sehen, die zum ersten Mal in Europa zu sehen sind. Viele Werke aus Privatsammlungen, die eben auch normalerweise nicht so leicht zu sehen sind. Professor van der Stighelen, wie gesagt, ist eine der großen Expertinnen über Michaelina Wautier. Sie hat sie quasi vor 10 Jahren wiederentdeckt, kann man eigentlich sagen. Sie hat Kunstgeschichte an der Katholischen Universität in Leuven studiert. Ihre Magisterarbeit hat sie geschrieben über eine Künstlerin namens Anna-Maria Schurmann, die auch eine der wirklich aufregenden, spannenden weiblichen Persönlichkeiten des 17. Jahrhunderts waren. Sie war eine der ersten Studentinnen an der Universität in Utrecht. Sie war ein Universalgenie, sie sprach 10 Sprachen, sie hat eine Autobiografie geschrieben und sie war zugleich Malerin und Kupferstecherin. Ihre Doktorarbeit hat sie dann, oder sie hat promoviert 1984 mit einer Arbeit über den Antwerpener Maler Cornelis de Vos. Seit 2007 ist sie ordentliche Professorin, hat sie einen Lehrstuhl an der Katholischen Universität in Leuven und war dort Professorin bis zu ihrer Emeritierung im vergangenen Jahr. Sie hat zahlreiche Aufsätze, Bücher zu Themen über die flämische Kunst geschrieben. Sie hat zahlreiche Ausstellungen zu diesem Thema kuratiert. Sie hat auch bei dieser Ausstellung natürlich mitgearbeitet. Im Moment co-kuratiert sie eine Ausstellung über Van Dyck, den Europäer, der im Palazzo Ducale in Genua gezeigt werden wird und im März 2026, glaube ich, eröffnet werden soll. Heute, wie gesagt, spricht sie über Michaelina Wautier, die sie, ich habe es schon einmal erwähnt, vor ungefähr 10 Jahren wiederentdeckt hat. Vielleicht erzählt sie Ihnen das heute Abend auch, fast zufällig bei uns hier in der Sekundärgalerie, bei einem Besuch dort. Sie hat 2018 hat sie die erste kleine Ausstellung zu Michaelina Wautier im Maas-Museum in Antwerpen kuratiert. Da gab es noch wesentlich weniger Bilder, die man dieser aufregenden Malerin zuschreiben konnte, als das heute der Fall ist. Und viele dieser wiederentdeckten Bilder, Michaelina Wautier neu zugeschriebenen Bilder, gehen auch auf die Forschungen von Professor van Stighelen zurück. Ja, sie wird, wie gesagt, heute Abend über diese großartige Malerin, über ihr Leben und ihr Werk sprechen. Und ich bitte Sie jetzt mit mir gemeinsam, Professor van Stighelen, zu begrüßen.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to speak in English. You should forgive me. Allow me to emphasize that every word I speak this evening is dedicated to Dr. Gerlinde Gruber. As Agnes already said, she's the curator of this exhibition who has been absent now for more than 2 months. When you visit the exhibition, you will nonetheless encounter her presence in the thoughtful selection and in the refined interplay between the paintings. We are all very grateful to Gerlinde for her efforts in making the exhibition such an appealing and intellectually stimulating event that will be, I'm sure, be remembered for many years to come. Here you see her posing in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. I think it's good just to look at her for a moment and just realizing that she should have been here. In 1929, Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own was published. It would become one of the most groundbreaking feminist books of the 20th century. In this book, Woolf speculates what would have become of a woman with Shakespeare's genius in Shakespeare's time. I quote, "Let me imagine, since facts are so hard to come by, what would have happened had Shakespeare had a wonderfully gifted sister, called Judith, let us say." Woolf creates her to show how a woman with equal talent to Shakespeare would not, because of the structure of society, be able to achieve the same success. Judith's life is fraught with tragedy. First pressured by her family into an early marriage, she must escape to London to free herself to pursue art. She becomes pregnant, which makes a life of writing impossible. And I quote, "She killed herself one winter's night." In this talk, I would like to tell another story, undoubtedly a more unusual one, about Michaelina Wautier, a woman who had a brother, who was very gifted, but who was even more gifted, and even better, was his sister. It seems maybe to become a beautiful story. It sounds as if it could even be a fairy tale, but let me warn you, although there will be a happy ending, this evening my lecture is not going to be an enchanting novel, but just a traditional art historical perspective, focusing on the life and work of a painter who has been sacrificed to oblivion. When you're looking for traces of someone who has disappeared into the mists of time, every bit is precious. Every crumb must be swept up. And that is what I will try to do, bringing together the scarce biographical facts and the overlooked paintings she left behind. Few will have heard of Michaelina Wautier, thanks to the waves of feminist rebellion that began with a woman ahead of her time, like Virginia Woolf. This Brussels-based artist has only relatively recently been rediscovered. In 1993, while visiting the storerooms of the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, as Agnes said, I happened to come across a huge, impressive work. Ik stood somehow lost between copies by Rubens and Van Dyck. When I asked Dr. Karel Schütz, director of the Gemälde Gallery in the Kunsthistorisches Museum at that time, who the artist was, his answer was clear. It's by a woman. I became curious, and for over 20 years, I tried to arouse interest in her. I knocked on the doors of numerous museums, large and small, asking them to devote an exhibition to her, but to no avail. The response was always the same. Mounting an exhibition devoted to an artist who was entirely obscure would inevitably result in a financial ruin. It was only when preparing for the City Festival Antwerp Baroque 2018, Rubens Inspires, that interest in Michaelina grew. Organizing in Antwerp a year of Baroque without any attention to diversity became problematic, which was why the proposal was accepted. In the summer of 2018, a first exhibition ever was devoted to her in the Maas Museum in Antwerp. By then, she became the leading lady of Baroque. Surprisingly enough, and as far as we know, Michaelina Wautier's life was free of the adversity and hardship so common in the biographies of women. In this respect, Wautier can serve as a complement to a group of early modern women described by Gina Stumwasser as politically incorrect. This makes it all the more exciting to uncover the story of her life and the uniqueness of her versatile talent. Wautier left few paintings, no more than about 35, and one drawing, half of which are signed with her full name. Their variety is impressive, ranging from portraits of flower garlands, genre scenes, and depictions of saints to a couple of monumental history paintings. All of these works make a powerful impression in terms of their format, technique, and highly individual iconography. But how did she look? When we think of exceptional women, I would say especially women, I suppose immediately wonder what she looked like. We can be particularly happy that her self-portrait has been preserved. It provides a unique opportunity to come face to face with a female artist who can be counted among the most exceptional women of the early modern period. In her self-portrait, painted around 1650, she radiates confidence and ambition. Her attention to tiny details, for example, look at her palette, her bosom, the lace collar, and the extraordinary timepiece with a pink ribbon. These all exemplify her power of observation. More than anyone else, she herself was convinced that she succeeded as an artist. When Michaelina Wautier's life seems to have been devoid of the adversity so common in the biographies of female artists, the question remains if, or in how far, she was part of a tradition of women artists in the southern Netherlands. In 1567, Lodovico Guicciardini, an Italian author living in Antwerp, published his description of the Low Countries. He claimed that the Netherlands typically had quite a few women who practiced the arts. He referred to several contemporary female artists, such as Maria or Maiken Bessemer's Verhulst. She was Peter Bruegel's the elder's mother-in-law and a watercolorist. When Peter Bruegel died, his two sons were only aged 5 and 1, and it was their grandmother who taught them to paint. Another example is Katharina van Heemessen, who was the daughter of an Antwerp manurist and a humanist painter. Mary of Hungary appreciated her so much that she invited Katharina and her husband, a musician and organist, to join her at the Spanish court. Watercolors by Maria Bessemers has not been preserved. However, some signed paintings by Katharina van Heemessen are known, the most innovative of which is her self-portrait, as you see here at the right, dated 1548. The pose is based on examples from 15th century manuscript illumination, where texts by Pliny the Elder or Boccaccio were accompanied by images of women painting their own likeness, as you can see here. Just to know, in 2027, an exhibition on Katharina van Heemessen will be mounted in the Snijders and Rocox Museum in Antwerp. Even more impressive is the story of the little-known Livina Teerling, daughter of a famous book illuminator from Bruges, Simon Bening. After marrying George Teerling, he was born in Blankenbergen, in 1545, she left for England and is documented there by 1546, when she became court painter to the Tudor court, serving Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. She received an annual salary of £40 from 46 until her death in 1576, which was more than was provided to Hans Holbein the Younger. You should know what that means. No surviving works have been confirmed, but there are a few existing paintings that are suspected to be by Teerling, such as the portrait of the girl, formerly thought to be Elizabeth I, you see here. I think it's obvious that Michaelina had heard of these phenomena of an earlier generation, all active in Antwerp, but none of them could even compete with her. Just look at the two self-portraits. You see how small, in relation to the portrait by Michaelina, how small the self-portrait by Katharina van Hemessen was. That Michaelina was aware of early modern Asian women artists, such as the 16th century Sam Dang-shin, a Korean artist, writer, and poet, initiator of the genre of the Koshungdo, can obviously be excluded. Also in Korea, they are discovering now the tradition of their women artists from the 16th and 17th century. And who was Michaelina? The organization of the exhibition at the Kunsthistorisches Museum has fundamentally changed our view of the artist. A team of experts researched all aspects of her life and work. Curator of the exhibition, Katlijne, reflected on the challenges of reconstruction by screening historiographical sources and analyzing all available information on Michaelina's paintings in the Habsburg collections. Drawing on extensive archival research, Jean Bastianse has rewritten her biography and reconstructed her familial and social network. Anne Delvin and Pierre-Yves Guéris investigated the life and work of Michaelina's brother, the painter Charles Wautier. Meanwhile, Sabine van Sprang and Lara de Merode examined the artistic context of Brussels to determine the extent to which Michaelina was influenced by contemporary artists also working in Brussels. For the first time ever, advanced material technical research was carried out on a sample of her paintings by Kirsten Derks and Alice Lamb. Alongside the article in the catalogue, they published an extended version on the Kunsthistorisches Museum's website. So don't forget, there is extra extended information. Charlotte Rosen, curatorial assistant to Dr. Gruber in preparing the exhibition, contributed a mint chronology of Michaelina's life and network, seamlessly integrating contextual details about her brother Charles. Moreover, Rosen published a seminal article on the Italian influences on Michaelina's work, to read also on the website of the Kunsthistorisches Museum. I contributed an article on Michaelina's female predecessors, as Katharina van Hemessen, as well as an analysis of stylistic brilliant blending. The team's collaboration guarantees the added value of a multidisciplinary approach, while, unfortunately, we should not expect too much, also making it clear that Michaelina Wautier is not the type of woman who gives up her secrets easily. Michaelina was known throughout her life as Michele or Michile. Michaelina is a Latin name which was not used on an everyday basis. Even not in official documents, she was writing her name as Michele. At a certain point, she adopted Michaelina as her artist name, an undeniable sign of self-confidence and ambition. She was almost certainly born around 1614 in Mons, approximately 35 miles southwest of Brussels, into a prominent family. The exact date of her birth is not known, but there are several reasons to believe that it was around 1614. We have adopted this as a point of reference for the exhibition. She will have known her father barely, if maybe at all, as he died in 1617. Her father, Charles Wautier Sr., he had been a page to the Count of Fuentes, Viceroy of Naples, and bore the title of Lord in Ham sur Eure. Michaelina's mother, Jenne Georges, did not remarry after her husband's death, but was able to rely on a steady income from numerous bonds and annuities, held by both the Wautiers and by her own family. Although we really have scarce information on her, she must have been prominent in Michaelina's life, given that she was raised in a single-parent family. Additional information on the network of the families of both her father and her mother make clear that in her childhood, Michaelina must have been familiar with military, intellectual and cultural elites whose members had contacts that reached into the Brussels court. In short, Michaelina and her siblings were wealthy, highly educated, and well connected to a number of aristocratic families in the southern Netherlands. This new evidence influences our view on Michaelina and, as an artist, make her more understandable. In concrete, at least 3 of her brothers played an important role in her life. First, there was her brother Pierre, who would pursue a military career in which he later held the rank of captain of a unit of 200 Walloon cavalrymen. You see here his portrait by Michaelina. He probably settled in Brussels in the 1630s and must have provided an open door to the military elite who were part of the Archduke's entourage at the Brussels court. A strong personality becomes evident in the portrait Michaelina painted of him in the 50s. Second, there was Léon Wautier, who studied at the University of Leuven and later became a parish priest in Mons. He seems to have been an intellectual who, until his death, formed a link with the native city of the family Wautier and resided already in Brussels in 1642, but later moved to Mons. There was also a third brother, Charles, who was a painter and around 5 years older than Michaelina. He probably had more influence over Michaelina's personality and career than anyone else, and he would become her lifelong companion. Neither of them ever married. He too first appears in records in Brussels in 1642, where he lived near the palace of the Koudenberg Hill, the residence of Archduke Leopold Wilhelm of Austria, governor of the Spanish Netherlands from 1647 to 1656. From the outset, Leopold Wilhelm presented himself as one of the most prestigious art patrons of his time, collecting hundreds of works by southern Netherlandish painters. As a patron, he would prove pivotal for Michaelina. We can assume that Charles' move to Brussels was the main reason why Michaelina followed him to the court city. Her mother's death in 1638 may also have prompted her to leave. What do we know about Charles Wautier's career, and where and when did he receive his training? All we know is that he left Mons in 1642 for Brussels and worked there as a painter without having registered as a master. He apparently took a dim view of the regulations in Brussels and was unwilling to pay his dues. He only registered in the Brussels Guild in 1651, when the Guild obliged him to do so. In the registration entry, reference is made to his origin from Mons, and in the margin is noted, mysteriously, that Monsieur Wautier, Mr. Wautier, was trained abroad. Where exactly Charles received his artistic education is not known, but given the tradition of young painters to travel to Italy, that is probably where he trained. That Michaelina would have followed him south is less likely, although not impossible. Traveling back and forth from Brussels to Rome was no easy feat in those days, and keeping only male company would have compromised her reputation. This, however, does not preclude Charles from having returned from Italy with paintings and prints that could have served as a source of inspiration for both Charles and Michaelina. In light of the family situation, we can assume that Charles and Michaelina shared a workshop. All later sources, after all, confirm that the unmarried brother and sister lived in the same house in Brussels. In 1668, Michaelina and Charles purchased a large house near the Kapellenkerk, Église la Chapelle, in the center of Brussels. They acquired it together. Moreover, there are remarkable stylistic resemblances which sometimes make it difficult to distinguish Michaelina's paintings from those of her brother. Look here at this view in Brussels. It's a view on the Kapellenkerk, and you see here a very, very small street called Heilige Geeststraatje, and on this side, Michaelina and her brother were living in a very beautiful house. So they were just looking onto the choir of the church. And when you will visit the last room of the exhibition, you will see a splendid reconstruction of a room, a kind of a room in which Charles and Michaelina would have worked, looking through the window into the choir of the Kapellenkerk. In general, Charles, without being biased, he was less versatile, less innovative, and the pictorial quality of his paintings is overall less convincing. Although this, of course, doesn't imply that he wasn't a good painter, as evidenced in this young Bacchus in Prague, the most beautiful painting by his hand. Charles was highly regarded as a portrait painter, and many engravings were made of his painted portraits of courtiers. Theodore van Merle's engraving, you see here at the left, after Charles Wautier's painted portrait of the Duke of York, offers a convincing example. Happily, there are significant differences between their signatures, which, besides this stylistic idiom, makes it easier to distinguish their respective work from each other. While Michaelina used her first and last name in a cursive script, as you see here, this is the cursive side of a drawing we will discuss later on, while Charles' signature only consists of his initial, I hope you can see it, a C, point, and his surname in capitals. This is the signature that's on the beautiful young Bacchus I showed you a couple of minutes ago. Although we know Michaelina's face, for the time being, Michaelina as a personality remains shrouded in the mist of time. She died on the 1st November 1689 and was buried in the Kapellenkerk you have seen. By then, she was 75 years old. The earliest trace of her as an artist dates from 1643. Her last known dated painting bears the date 1659. No works created with certainty during the last 30 years of her life are known. Was there some reason preventing her from continuing to work alongside her brother? Michaelina and Charles visited their notary together on the 11th of June 1682. Look at the signature at the right. And when you look at this fluent signature that she placed under the record, we can be sure that she was still in good health when she was sitting in front of the notary in 1682. So we really do not know, what happened during the last 30 years of her life. To understand the uniqueness and variety of Michaelina's talent, it is imperative to have, of course, a look at her paintings. How did her career start? What has been the basis of her oeuvre? How difficult it is to find out is immediately apparent from the quality of her earliest known work. To get an idea of the evolution and variety of this, we will first focus on the work that can be dated before 1650. A copper engraving, you see it here, by Paulus Pontius of 1643, after the portrait of Commander Andrea Cantelmo, demonstrate that from the beginning of her career, Michaelina Wautier was exceptionally gifted in conveying her male sitters, powerful personalities. The original portrait, on which the engraving has been based, was not preserved, but thanks to this subscription with the full reference to her name, Michaelina Wautier Spinksit, there is no doubt, you see it here, that she was effectively the creator. At the end of the 1640s, a large-scale history painting with a religious theme seemed to come out of the blue. the mystic marriage of Saint Catherine. No other work of this nature and size is known from the years 1643 to 1650. However, the painting in no way exhibits the kind of shortcomings typical of fledgling artists. The composition with the 6 life-size figures is extremely well balanced. The positioning of the group in an open landscape, the proportions of the massive bodies, and the decorative folds of their colorful robes are utterly convincing. The saints interact and seem to be conversing. The painting was hidden in a refectory of a seminar in Namur when it was discovered by chance thanks to the signature. It was in a terrible condition, but in 2018, on occasion of the exhibition, enough funding was raised to restore it. Her signature could not have been more explicit. Michaelina Wautier, invenit et fecit, 1649. She both invented and painted the composition. It is therefore difficult to believe that Wautier did not paint any other history scenes before 1649. Around 1650, she suddenly seems to have taken a different course. And this is the surprise of the exhibition. A series of 5 senses exposed for the first time in Europe here in Vienna. From 1650 onwards, her style became more original, more vigorous, and more down to earth. In the same year, 1650, she painted 5 canvases representing the 5 senses, an ensemble that we knew existed thanks to an auction catalogue, which turned out to be undetectable. You will also see a reproduction of the cover of this auction catalogue in the exhibition. Tracing the series has become a scavenger hunt with a very big surprise. What did we know about the 5 senses by Michaelina Wautier 7 years ago? The 5 paintings were twice auctioned in Valenciennes, once in 1883 and a second time in 98. After that, all traces of them disappeared until 1975, not too long ago, where the 5 senses passed through Drouot in Paris and were described as an important series of 5 paintings of young boys, most of them signed and dated 1650. On the cover of the tin auction catalogue, the flute player, one out of the 5 senses, was reproduced in black and white. While preparing the survey exhibition devoted to Michaelina Wautier in the summer of 2018, all means were deployed to track down the series. In 2017, the Rubens House launched a campaign to find it. We only had what you see here at the right, this black and white reproduction of one of the 5 senses. So Flemish radio and television stations cooperated, and CODART, the Association of Curators for Dutch and Flemish Art in the museums worldwide, also joined the search for the lost 5 senses, albeit in vain. However, in 2019, 1 year after the exhibition, out of the blue, the 5 paintings surfaced somewhere in the UK. A look at the image from the auction catalogue of 1975 and the newly discovered sense of hearing left no doubt. They were offered to Christie's by a private owner and were bought in 2020 by Rosemarie and Eik van Otterlo, who have lent the series as a promised gift to the Center for Netherlandish Art in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The importance of the 5 senses for gaining better insight into Michaelina Wautier's oeuvre cannot be understated. The 5 fully signed and dated paintings, I just show them to you the one after the other. Here you see sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Affirm her stunning versatility and illustrate the unique way in which she conceived genre scenes. When Michaelina painted the five senses in 1650, as far as we know, she had no experience in depicting genre scenes. Nevertheless, she handled the theme in an exceptionally creative way and integrated various painterly traditions. Traditionally, the senses are almost always personified by adult men. Wautier deviated from this tradition by choosing boys. It is noticeable that Wautier had painted many more boys and men than girls or women during her career. She achieved the greatest variation by depicting 5 distinct personalities with completely different physiognomies. In these scenes from 1650, Michaelina parades also her expertise in realistically depicting curly, wavy, or straight hair. Her fascination with rendering hair would only increase and become a hallmark of all her later paintings. Wautier signed and dated the 5 paintings in full, Michaelina Wautier, 1650. What is remarkable about this series is that she placed her signature in different places in the composition and signed all 5. Until now, it has always been assumed that Michaelina's inspiration may well have come from Michael Sweerts, a painter also active in Brussels, who was about the same age as Wautier and who for decades has been regarded as a groundbreaking artist. Sweerts, too, painted attractive representations of young boys as personifications of the 5 senses, such, for example, as the allegory of taste, you see here, or the allegory of touch. Recent research, however, has shown that it was the other way around, and that it was in fact Wautier who influenced Sweerts during his Brussels period. Both Geoffrey Muller and Yannick Toundi, as well as Kirsten Derks, who defended her PhD entitled Scanning Michael Sweerts and Michaelina Wautier by means of macro XRF, in 2023, they all came to the same conclusion. Sweerts was first documented as living in Rome in 1646, and no paintings are known to have been made by him in Brussels before that date. By the time he returned to Italy, Wautier had already completed most of her known works. Her 5 senses, and this is indeed very important, demonstrate that by 1650 she was already well advanced in her career, producing avant-garde genre paintings, which became a source of inspiration for the most important contemporary artists in Brussels. Michael Sweerts founded a unique academy to train young pupils in Brussels around 1655, and only in 1656 he published his book of etchings entitled Diversae Facies in Usum Invenium et Aliorum Delineatae, a book in which he too introduced heads and young boys, and in a daily context, posing in casual clothing. But Michaelina, she did the same already 5 years before him. The series of the 5 senses fits perfectly within Michaelina's oeuvre. She painted genre scenes in which this type of boy playing the leading role throughout her active period. The scene with the bubbling boys, you see here, features brothers, one could say, of the boys personifying the 5 senses. Also in the playful paraphrase, with the 2 boys scrabbling over an egg. Look at this. Similar boys are represented. First look at the bubbling boys and see how they really look like the boys posing on the 5 senses. And when you look at another painting by Michaelina, it's the only painting by Michaelina that is missing in the exhibition here in Vienna, and this has everything to do with the fact that it is exposed at this moment in the National Museum of Women in the Arts, where a couple of days ago was opening the exhibition on women artists from Antwerp to Amsterdam. The exhibition in Washington, D.C. will later travel to Antwerp, as has already been said. In the two latter scenes, Michaelina lavished attention on subtle color contrast, whereby they can be dated shortly after 1650, the somewhat later than the five senses. A sensitive head of a boy with a white cravat fits perfectly well with the other introspective boys. The Five Senses series, as well as the two other genre scenes with the two boys and the boy with the white cravat, are a unique expression of Michaelina Wautier's power of observation. The boys who served as models for these five depictions were undoubtedly registered from life. Because they appeared to be ordinary boys, it is obvious that the artist sought out appropriate models. This begs the question whether she and her brother Charles had their own studio where they invited mostly male, young and older models to pose for them. The great interest in drawing from life in Brussels as a basis for all artistic activity is clear from the drawing academy that Michael Sweerts, you remember, founded after he returned to Brussels. Sweerts' drawing school from around 55 gives an idea of how such sessions were organized. You see that the model is standing in the center and that mostly young pupils are looking at him and are drawing from life. However, it is clear that Michaelina Wautier painted lively scenes with young boys, at least, as I said, 5 years before Sweerts. And it can be ruled out that Charles or Michaelina attended the Drawing Academy, which was intended to train young artists, as you can see here. Looking for truly related paintings from an earlier date, one sooner ends up in the northern Netherlands. In Haarlem, for example, from the 1630s onwards, representations of the senses were made on individual supports and in a larger format. It is noteworthy that children were chosen for the personifications. Similar scenes are known by Jans Minse-Molenaar, for example, and his wife, Judith Leister. They are distinguished by the lively interpretation of children with a natural expression and often colorful incidental details, as you see here at the right. Iconographically and compositionally, Michaelina's flute player dovetails neatly with the Haarlem type. The young flute player by Judith Leister from around 1635 also is associated with the sense of hearing. Michaelina Wautier succeeded in reconciling various traditions in her genre scenes. She worked in Brussels and was undoubtedly familiar with the Antwerp Baroque tradition. In addition, she must have come into contact in one way or another with paintings from the northern Netherlands. How this happened remains an open question. Antwerp was the hub of the European art market in the first half of the 17th century, and the presence in Brussels of Archduke collector Leopold Wilhelm must have stimulated the circulation of paintings. Inventive, developed and talented as Wautier was, she will have profited from the rich supply there. During his stay in Brussels, Archduke Leopold Wilhelm collected 1,400 paintings. In 1656, they were all sent to Vienna, where they were exhibited in the Stallburg, which became the Kunsthistorisches Museum in 1890. The painter Jan Anton van der Baere carefully inventorized the collection. This source, so the inventory, is at the beginning of the tracing of Michaelina, because 3 of the 4 paintings by her that were part of the Archduke's collection were registered as you see here, Original von Jungfrau Magdalena Wautiers van Mons oder Bergen Henegouw in Nederland. This was the key to the artist's biography. At least, based on this information, we knew that she came from une famille montoise in the Netherlands, from Mons. The reference in the inventory to Magdalena as the first name of the painter instead of Michaelina is one of the mysteries that our research had to deal with. Fortunately, the problem has been partially solved by the research in the context of this exhibition. Additional archival research has now indisputably proved that there were two sisters in the Wautier family, of whom Marie-Madeleine was born in 1604 and Michel, alias Michaelina, around 1614. By the end of their lives, they were dwelling together in the same house as their brother Charles, where Marie-Magdalena died in 1687 and 2 years later, Michel in 1689. A newfound late 17th century family tree retraced in the private archives of Diego de Wautier, a descendant of Pierre Wautier, the man who has been portrayed by Michaelina, has shown that Marie Magdalena, the sister of Michaelina, was a devotee, which means as much as a spiritual daughter. These devotees were mostly prosperous ladies, comparable to beggars, though not living in a community. The invisibility of Michaelina's sister, Maria Magdalena, may be explained by her choice to spend her life as a filia devota. To understand the reason why the two sisters were mixed up in the inventory of the Archduke, you see, Magdalena Wautiers and not Michaelina Wautiers are not easy to untangle. It can be excluded that also Magdalena was a painter, because not one painting is known signed by her name. A close reading of the catalogue will get you a long way. This is an unmistakable hint to buy the catalogue, but you will be surprised. Do we know more about this period in Wautier's life and career? Coincidentally, a unique source has been preserved from exactly 1650, the year in which the 5 censuses were created, demonstrating that Michaelina was already well known at the court of the Archduke around 1650. Courtiers in Brussels were expected to be accomplished dancers. Accordingly, an excellent French dancing master was attached to the court, and he instructed members of the nobility to dance for over 40 years. Himself a dancer, Adam Pierre de Lagrenay bore the title of Maître de Danse, Master of Dance, and he entered Leopold Wilhelm's service in Brussels in 1649. In his journal, now we are coming closer to Michaelina, he recorded the names of the people he instructed. From this exceptional source, we can form an idea of the diverse clientele, including, for example, the son of the King of Denmark and the Duke of Buckingham. Now, this dancing master, de Lagrenay, also collected paintings by 16th and 17th century Flemish master. At the back of his journal, you see here his journal, and it's also part of the exhibition, he diligently recorded the names of the artists from whom he bought paintings, their subjects and prices. On the 17th of January, 1615, he wrote that he had purchased 2 pictures by Mademoiselle Wautier. A depiction of a Bacchus and probably also a Nicodemus. Of primary importance is the fact that he was active in the very heart of the court in Brussels, and that he knew Mademoiselle Wautier as an artist, and had bought works by her. Moreover, this source establishes that Michaelina was known in the Archduke Leopold Wilhelm's immediate proximity. Based on this inscription, the type of paintings she sold to de Lagrenay were completely different from the 5 censuses, and is an indication that she was already painting other kind of themes, as, for example, a Bacchus, mythological themes, by 1615. But this conclusion immediately raises also other questions. If Michaelina worked for the free market, where did she offer her paintings? Did she receive potential clients in her house? Did she have the opportunity to show her pictures elsewhere? Were her genre paintings commissioned, or was the theme so appealing that she took the initiative herself? So many questions with no answers at all. Let's return to her paintings. What happened after 1615? In 1652, Michaelina Wautier painted 2 flowers still life. I show one and the other, both to see in the exhibition. You see here the one next to the other. The 2 garlands betray her keen observation of nature and expertise and involve a subtlety that complements her usual firmness. Their exquisite quality is surprising because Michaelina was never a true flower painter, like so many of her peers. The verso of the flower garland with the butterfly bears the mark of the Antwerp panel maker, as you can see at the right above. It is therefore certain that Wautier bought these panels, so these paintings are made on panels, that she bought them in Antwerp. This is interesting because it indicates also that she had connections with Antwerp and may have spent time there. The iconography of the pendants is exceptional and again proves Michaelina's erudition and curiosity. Combining this antique motif with the glory of a colorful painted flower garland is a completely original idea. For the classic motif of festoons suspended between ox skulls, she drew inspiration from ancient monuments. The motif may have been borrowed from the inner reliefs, I go back for a moment, of the Ara Pacis in Rome, or, as Charlotte Rosen discovered, from the funerary urn of Acilia Higia. This is an altar that was once part of Rubens' ancient sculpture collection in Antwerp. It goes without saying, I hope that you see that at the side of these garlands there are bucrania, skulls of oxes referring to antiquity and at the same time referring to the vanity of life. And this combination of flowers and bucrania is extremely original. One could say that we do not know of other combinations of this kind. It goes without saying that the addition of the 4 skulls adds a strong memento mori connotation, reminding us of the nature of floral beauty, vanity of floral beauty, and more broadly, the fragility of human life itself. Here too, the question remains as to how she became familiar with these sources. The macro XRF scanning of Wautier's garlands with flowers, conducted by Kirsten Derks in the context of her PhD research, has revealed much about Michaelina's working methods, because several pentimenti have been discovered. They are painted with a sense of detail, lacking in other works. It is very clear that she adapted her style to the genre, but she could only achieve this range of colors by using expensive blue pigments, such as azurite and ultramarine. You see here a detail of the macro XRF scanning done by Kirsten Derks, and when you look very carefully, you see that she was repeating herself and that parts of the leaves have been changed. Her garlands offer the opportunity to say very briefly something about the evolution of the prices of Michaelina's work. In 2093, in Amsterdam, one of these garlands of flowers was sold for about 15,000 euros. In 2019, 1 year after the exhibition, the pendant garland with the dragonfly changed hands for nearly $500,000. The financial rating is not important as such, but is very important as an indication of the increasing appreciation of Wautier's painting and demonstrates that she is increasingly taken seriously as an artist. In the period 1654, 1659, she produced some of her most original works. The portrait of the Jesuit Martino Martini, for example, dated 54. It marks a turning point in her oeuvre. The Jesuit's name is written on the painting in Chinese calligraphy. Martini, seen unusually in three-quarter view to the right, looks straight ahead without seeing eye contact with the viewer. The power of his portrait lies in the combination of the sitter's physiognomy and his imposing physique. The palette is limited, but the silky sheen of the Chinese robe is rendered in numerous tonal variations. Falling over the breast of the sitter are the deep dark folds of a blue silk tabard. You can see examples, real examples of the tabard's winter and summer version in the exhibition. Once again, the eye is drawn to the way in which Martini's hair has been painted. His locks and beard are beginning to grey in places, and the subtle gradations are stunningly suggested. This is the only lifelike portrait of the Jesuit that we know. A comparison with an anonymous portrait of the same man preserved in Trento, dating from 61, demonstrates the overwhelming superiority of the observation and expression of Michaelina. Within the category of undated works, the portrait by Michaelina of the Saints Agnes and Dorothy, with its intimate atmosphere and colorful palette, holds a special place. There is no eye contact between them, yet they lean slightly towards each other, seemingly unaware of the viewer's presence. Michaelina convincingly emphasizes their vulnerability through the blush on their cheeks. The individual facial features leave little doubt that the picture should be interpreted as a portrait historié, a type of portrait in which the sitters are represented as historical or mythological figures, or in this case, as saints. Behind them, the dark space is closed, and you only see a section of the curtain. Look at these details, representing also the blushes on their cheeks. And you can compare it also with, at the left, a macro XRF screening. And you see that here too some changing has been made, and it's interesting to look also at the right slide, because there you see an intention to reconstruct the original colors of the robe of this little Dorothy. One moment. I'm afraid that I'm speaking too long, so I'm just trying to drop some things. Here you see just an announcement of the funding we could raise for the restoration of this painting. And now we are going to come to the last phase of her oeuvre, where we have extremely interesting paintings, fully signed and dated. And the first I want to introduce is this painting of the Education of the Virgin, which brings us indeed to the last period for which there are documented paintings by Michaelina. In this charming painting, the figures of Anne, Saint Anna and Saint Joachim appear to be sculpted with light. Their tawny faces contrast with the more diffusely illuminated face of Mary. They are really very typical for Wautier's work. The interaction between the figures is underscored by the way in which they are touching each other. 4 years later, she painted another religious painting, fully signed and dated 1659. The Annunciation is one of Michaelina's most important paintings, and it occupies a special place in her oeuvre because it is the latest dated work by her that is currently known. It was produced exactly 10 years after the mystic marriage of St. Catherine, her earliest known history painting. The two figures are life-size. The light enters from the left to illuminate Mary's womb, the place of conception. Her gown is simple, caught in at the waist by a twisted ribbon. Only the deep blue mantle underlines the extraordinary role she is destined to play. It seems as if the angel's abrupt arrival has caused it to slip from her shoulders and pull around her feet. Look again at this slide of the full composition. In 1659, Michaelina was about 45 years and could look back on a fruitful career as a painter of religious and mythological works, portraits, genre pieces, and still lifes. The question that comes up is, for whom were these works intended? The investment required to make portraits or genre scenes was relatively small. Probably Michaelina was wealthy enough and could easily afford the necessary materials. But this was quite different with respect to altarpieces, such as the Education of the Virgin and the Annunciation, and even much more the case for the Triumph of Bacchus. That was originally more than 4 meters width. This canvas would have filled the room and required labor-intensive and precise work. The subject, incidentally, is so specific that not every patron would have wanted it. It is unlikely that Michaelina devised such a concept on her own initiative. It makes, I think, more sense that she was commissioned to paint a monumental composition, as the Triumph of Bacchus. Because the painting was inventorized in Leopold Wilhelm's collection in Vienna in 1659, it seems logical to assume that he granted her this commission. Archduke Leopold Wilhelm of Austria was governor of the Spanish Netherlands, and he has always been presented as a paragon of devotion and a lover of the arts. His picture collection consisted for 1/3 of religious paintings, but this implies that 2/3 of the collection depicted profane scenes. His interest in Italian and Flemish painting meant that mythological themes were abundantly represented. If during his sojourn in Brussels, Leopold Wilhelm engaged Michaelina to paint the Bacchus scene, one wonders whether and to what extent she was given explicit instructions. How it was actually made remains a mystery. Did Wautier make a sketch? Was an external, maybe, prototype used? Could the artist decide freely how to work up the composition? One thing is clear, Wautier's painting is astonishingly original, obliging us to believe that Leopold Wilhelm had faith in her art and therefore gave her free rein to a certain extent. The composition is dominated by 10 life-size figures passing from right to left in an open landscape. In the middle of the composition, a satyr pushes a wheelbarrow on which Bacchus lies. The goat-legged satyr can more likely be identified as Silenus, here in the middle, Bacchus' stepfather, who is always portrayed with a rotund belly seated on a donkey. Silenus here appears not as a down-and-out merrymaker, but rather as a greybeard, worn down by life, who closely resembles the saints she also painted for Leopold Wilhelm, such as Saint Joseph and the 2 versions of Saint Joachim. All 3 parts of the collection of the Kunsthistorisches Museum, and all 3 listed in the inventory of the Archduke as original van Jungfrau Michaelina Wautier. The iconography of these 3 representations responded to the Archduke's devotion, and he must have been intrigued by the vigorous brushwork. In only a few of her paintings are the free touches of different colors so spontaneous. Look at this example. The saints evidently derived from life studies, and the artist showed no restraint to show them. One might even get the impression that they were painted in a very short time. Back to the Triumph. Almost all the figures face left, creating the impression that the retinue is in motion. On the far left, a grey-haired man pulls the wheelbarrow forward with a double rope. 6 children disport themselves walking with the cortege. Tracks are visible in the ground, a dog is barking in the left foreground, and the hilly landscape is visible in distance. Except for the woman on the far right, none of the personages look out at the viewer. They are all too absorbed in their own activities. It is Michaelina herself who includes herself as a spectator's accomplice. She derives inspiration from antique sculptures of Bacchantes, standing in contrapposto, as are often found in Hellenistic sculptures. For that matter, Michaelina was inspired more than once by antique prototypes. There exists a signed study by her hand after an antique head. References the head of Ganymede with the eagle, dating from the 1st century. The sculpture was kept at the Villa Medici in Rome in the mid-17th century. No marble or plaster copies were made before the end of the 17th century. So it's a bit of a problem. This suggests that either Wautier saw the bust herself in Italy, or another artist, possibly Stighelen, drew it in Rome and took the drawing home for Michaelina to be copied. We just don't know. It took months to trace the origins of Michaelina's sculptures, but Charlotte Rose, whom I mentioned earlier, managed to identify the inspiring bust convincingly. She published a seminal article on Michaelina Wautier and the influence on antiquity on the website of the Kunsthistorisches, as I said before. The article contains the result of an in-depth investigation and discusses widely the possibility of a trip to Italy. I would like to take this opportunity to thank her for all her efforts. Charlotte is a former student of mine from Leuven University who had the unique possibility to become an intern for 1 year at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna and to become the assistant curator of Gerlinde Grube for the current exhibition on Wautier. After Gerlinde became ill, she took on her workload and many of her responsibilities, doing a heroic job without ever considering working additional hours. I am extremely proud of her. Familiarity with the classical tradition. Thank you. Familiarity with the classical tradition, remember also the skulls of oxen, the bucrania, holding the garlands of flowers, was highly exceptional for female artists, and therefore undoubtedly contributed to her positive self-image. Next to this, she was also inspired by 17th century emblematic books, such as the Iconography by Ripa. The children, besides Michaelina's alter ego in the painting, are playing with the billy goat, as you see here at the left, an animal traditionally regarded as a symbol of lust. In the illustrated edition of Ripa's collection of emblems from 1603, the personification of libidine, lust, poses beside a billy goat. The portraits of male sitters mentioned earlier, such as her brother Pierre Wautier and Martini Martini, illustrate that the artist could render male models like no other. And then she suddenly painted a picture populated by almost nude men. It is as though she wanted to do away with the old chestnut that women were incapable of rendering male corporality. For the procession, she empathically selected men of different ages, with various skin tones, and from all weight classes. Just go back for one moment. Young boys, too, enliven the scene with their unrestrained gesticulation at the right. In this way, Michaelina generates an inversion whereby she, a woman, directs the cortege. The mythological figures are set in a timeless virtual space. By gazing out of the painting, Wautier is seeking a connection with contemporary reality. It has become clear before that the dance master de la Grenée, who had been invited to the court by the Archduke, already bought paintings made by Mademoiselle Wautier in 1650. Next to this, it cannot be otherwise than that Wautier was commissioned to paint the Triumph of Bacchus by Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, and that after completion it was sent to Vienna, where it was registered in his collection in 1659. It cannot be otherwise than that it was the Archduke himself who encouraged her pictorial ambition and challenged her artistic intelligence. The last thing the Archduke could ever have predicted is that it would take almost 4 centuries before others also discovered her genius. It is not known how the monumental painting of the Triumph of Bacchus was transported from Brussels to Vienna in the mid-17th century, probably rolled up, but we know how complex it was to bring the monumental canvas back to the Netherlands in 2018. Here you can see how the large canvas is being carried down the museum stairs with the utmost care, under the watchful eye, one moment, of I think Elke Oberthaler? Yeah, I think so. On occasion of the exhibition, Michaelina, Baroque's leading lady in the Mass in Antwerp, a crane was needed, look at the right, to transport it to the second floor of the museum. In the exhibition, the bust of the Archduke, not without reason, you see how complicated it was and how expensive it was, by the way. In the exhibition, the bust of the Archduke, not without reason, guarded the huge painting. The first exhibition ever on Michaelina Wautier in 2018 in Antwerp meant a first discovery of her impressive artistic personality and was the basis for a launch as a Google banner in 2019. Her fame only crossed the ocean thanks to the first ever US show in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It is the exhibition of the 5 senses that brought her to the cover of the New York Times in December 2022. The Boston Globe of November 2022 headlined the best female old master you've never heard of, until now. As a politically incorrect woman, Michaelina Wautier managed to convince contemporary art lovers. Later on, politically correct people succeeded in damaging her reputation so much that Michaelina Wautier's fame faded away in a short time. When her fabulous 5 senses were offered for sale in 1975 in the paper-tin auction catalogue of Drouot, the artist is referred to as Michaelina Wautier, the author of the 5 paintings, and about the artist is nothing known. Fortunately, those days are gone forever. Today, we are enjoying an exhibition of Michaelina Wautier's work at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, the only museum in the world to have 4 of her paintings and the only collection to have appreciated and valued her work from the beginning. Here, she feels at home. In March 2026, the exhibition will be held at the second venue, the Royal Academy in London. From now on, no stage is too high for her. Thank you.